Hey, good afternoon to you too. See, everyone can see that's working. So you can continue talking to each other throughout the webinar about what the presenters are saying. And lastly, we are recording this webinar. I'm double checking that the webinar is recording. Great, yes. Okay, so we're definitely recording this webinar. And so we'll be able to share this with you. We'll send the link out as soon as we get it uploaded to our website following the session, the webinar. That way you continue to share it with friends and family and your colleagues after it's complete. All right, and with that, I'm going to turn this program over to our fearless leader, our Vice President of Student Affairs, Dr. Robin Holmes Sullivan.
Thank you, Taisha. Greetings to everyone. As Taisha mentioned, my name is Robin Holmes Sullivan, and I recently joined the Office of the President as the new Vice President for Student Affairs. Prior to this great opportunity, I held various senior level positions at the University of Oregon for about 25 years, and I served as the Vice President on that campus for 9 years before coming to UC. I am a licensed clinical psychologist and began working first in the University Counseling Center at University of Oregon, and then for about 14 years I served as the director of the Counseling Center. So I very much am interested in issues such as what we're going to talk about today and in supporting all of our clinicians to work well with our students. Very, very excited about the great work that occurs among and between our campuses and the Office of the President. And this video conference is a great example of that. We're very pleased with the number of folks who are participating today. And as we look at the attendee list, we can see that we have participants from most of our UC campuses. We have lots of guests from California State University system, from the California Community College system. We even have some folks from some private institutions and a few folks from County Mental Health. And it's just an amazing group of folks who are participating in this today. I'm really pleased to be able to share this opportunity with you. The response and the turnout to the webinar is not only remarkable, but it shows that it's a testament to the timeliness of this topic and the need for more support and ongoing training for clinicians who are tasked with supporting the mental health needs of so many different communities. The idea for this webinar came about after a conversation with Allison Davenport, who is a staff attorney at the Immigrant Legal Resource Center, and with my deputy, Dr. Griffin Desta, who you're going to hear from in a moment. And we were having a conversation in our planning of UC's response to the Trump administration's policies. We became aware of really the influx of students seeking counseling due to distress and anxieties triggered by the policy changes. One of the goals that I personally have is focusing and ensuring that our campuses have what they need to respond to the growing demands for mental health services on our various campuses. After the meeting Julian and I had with the Immigrant Legal Resource Center, I immediately started thinking about our clinicians and wanted to ensure that you all had the proper training and the resources to respond appropriately and well to these students. So we tasked Dr. Caldwell Harvey with putting together a training for clinicians across the system. And as she was doing her research on this topic, she uncovered the abundance of expertise we have right within our own UC family on this subject. And so here we are today. I want to thank her and our administrative analyst, Alina Tahara, for coordinating this event. And now, without further ado, I will introduce our panelists. First, we will hear from Julia Friedlander, who is the Deputy General Counsel at the Office of the President, and Dr. Jelena Griffin Desta, who serves as the Deputy to the Vice President and Executive Director of Student Development and Engagement here at OP. They're going to provide an overview of the Trump administration immigration policies and implications for university students. Then we will hear from Dr. Diana Pena, staff psychologist at UC Berkeley CAPS and the Undocumented Student Program. She will discuss what clinicians need to know about presenting concerns, therapeutic trust, and legal stressors. Next, Dr. Manuel Casas, Professor Emeritus in the Department of Counseling, Clinical, and School Psychology at UC Santa Barbara, will explore utilizing a social justice approach to supporting undocumented students and their families. Dr. Carola Suarez Orozco, professor in the Department of Psychology at UCLA and co-director of the Institute for Immigration, Globalization, and Education, will talk about what we can learn from the literature on what it takes to make sure that we don't have an undocu-friendly campus. And our final speaker, Daniel Arturo Alfaro Arellano, UCSD's Undocumented Student Services Coordinator, will discuss what is currently happening on our campuses and share resources available through our UC Undocumented Student Resource Centers. After that, I will come back to you and facilitate the question and answer session. And now, let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to turn it over to Julia and Julina, and they will start the presentations.
Good morning. My name is Julia Friedlander, Deputy General Counsel in the UC Office of the President. And I wanted to start by just taking you back to November 9th, when immediately after the election, it was apparent to the Office of the President that there were going to be many, many special concerns on the part of undocumented students on UC campuses. And we started to turn to what are those concerns, and what can the university do about them? What are existing university policies in place, and what kinds of things do we need to articulate to support the undocumented community at the university? And it was quickly apparent to us that undocumented students really had three key concerns. One set of concerns has to do with policing and the role of campus police, and what role campus police might or would play in immigration enforcement under a new federal administration. The second set of issues had to do with informational privacy and the privacy of the data that students have provided to the university as well as to other government agencies. And finally, issues about really financial support and other forms of academic support. Obviously, there's a tremendous amount of vulnerability that is in many ways economic vulnerability on the part of many of our undocumented students. So we have put forward two documents that I actually recommend to people both inside and outside the university system, in that we certainly welcome people to borrow from them to the extent that they're useful. We first issued a statement of principles in support of undocumented students back in November, and then more recently issued a document that is an FAQ document for university employees about what might happen in the way of immigration enforcement on UC campuses. The first issue that we addressed was the fact that university police, we do have 10 campuses, we have a police department on each of our campuses, and university police have a very different role from the role of immigration enforcement. And their role of providing a safe environment for the public generally, as well as all the members of the university community, is quite distinct from the immigration enforcement role. And it was clear to the university that the university did not want to spend its policing resources on tasks that are relevant to immigration enforcement. That's not what the university police department is for. And the university has made a commitment in its principles that it is not going to use its policing resources for immigration enforcement. Then the second document I referred you to, and I think you'll have a website where you can find these things, really addresses those questions about, okay, well, if university police are not going to be serving the immigration enforcement role, what about the ICE or other Department of Homeland Security departments enforcing immigration laws on university campuses? What happens if ICE comes on campus? What should be expected of university employees? And we have outlined a number of steps that university employees should be aware of in the event that somebody asks them, for instance, for information, personal information about individual students, asks them to enter parts of the campus that, while we are generally a public campus, there are nonetheless parts of a campus that are really limited access. And to the extent that university employees face situations where somebody wants to access those limited access places, we've provided a guidance on how to respond in those circumstances. As to informational privacy, the principles articulate that there are quite a number of both state and federal laws that protect the privacy of all members of the university community. And the university policy is that while we will always comply with the law, that among those laws are the laws that protect the privacy of members of our community, and that we would not be turning over information either to the public or to other government entities unless we are required by law to do so. Finally, as to student support, there are, in California, UC students benefit from in-state tuition and also access to certain forms of financial aid that substitute for federal financial aid. And we have been really looking carefully at those, all of our programs, to make sure that they are consistent with the law and defensible, and we'll continue to do that. With that, I am going to turn this over to Dr. Griffin-Destin, literally.
Yeah, thank you. We're in the same place. So I think this speaks to the importance of having a malleable organization. So prior to the presidential election, the University of California Office of the President was deeply engaged with support for undocumented students for all of our campuses. The president made that very clear when she provided funds to support undocumented students by establishing of our undoc centers on campus, and you'll hear from one of our directors later. We also provided funds to start a legal center that continues to provide support for undocumented students in terms of giving them access to the best, we're hoping, the best legal advice and support. And also we were able to shore up some of the financial services for students by ways of grants and other kinds of permissible ways that we could support students financially to make them a little bit more equal and whole compared to some of our students who are considered documented. So we were in a position, so post the election, to be able to be really quick on our feet to respond to a lot of the executive orders. And of course, you know, all of the promises that were made during the election necessarily gave rise to a lot of concern from this population. So we immediately, as you heard Julia Friedlander comment on, were able to establish guidelines to our campuses, to our coordinators and directors. We were able to provide guidance to our police, as she mentioned, and we established Know Your Rights cards that were rolled out about 2 or 3 weeks ago that was designed to help students understand their rights in this particular environment. And indeed, we're continuing to unpack a lot of the issues that have come about as a result of this particular administration. And as we know, it could change from week to week, which is one of the important takeaways, is to have a malleable infrastructure in place so that we could quickly respond and allay students' concerns to the extent that we can about what the university is doing within the law and within our guidelines to be able to support students in this way. So again, I think Taisha is going to put up the website where you can see all of our materials. We recommend that you read them and that you adopt them, adapt them, and because we certainly want to share as much as possible from the University of California that could be helpful. So with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Diana Pena.
Hi, can you all hear me? Okay, great. So I'm just going to jump in and talk a little bit. My name's Diana Pena, and it's a real honor. Thank you so much, Dr. Holmes-Sullivan, for inviting me to be a part of this panel, and thanks so much to Dr. Caldwell for organizing. So I want to talk about, I've been asked to talk about some of the things that I've been hearing in my role. I'm a staff psychologist at UC Berkeley, and I'm housed in the undocumented student program, where I provide full-time direct services to undocumented students in UC Berkeley's campus. We have roughly between 400 and 500 known undocumented students on our campus. And so I'm always a little nervous with this short amount of time to talk about a very diverse community. Our undocumented students have other identities as well. As we know, they're also trans and queer and Black and Muslim identified. They have different political identities, different family values around coming out of the shadows, different migration stories, right? So we're not going to be able to talk about all of those intersections today, or I won't be able to, but I encourage us all to be keeping these in mind. And I also want to say that, you know, I have the honor of serving undocumented students, and I'm not here to speak for them. I think that our primary role is to be listening to what our own communities are saying on our respective campuses and in our respective communities. My hope is that at least my lens and what I have been hearing and seeing students experience might help us all engage in those efforts. So I want to talk a little bit about things that might help establish therapeutic trust, as well as some of the presenting concerns and resources that might come with that. So to start with, I know many people are wondering what to include in these case notes in order to protect our students and still uphold our ethical responsibility. So a few years back, we consulted with our legal counsel at the Counseling Center, and we grappled with the pros and cons of identifying students as undocumented in case notes. And what we concluded is that, you know, unless there's a compelling reason to use the term undocumented in the chart, that it would be best to do so in case in the future, you know, it might protect them. And at the time, I think it was maybe like it was an additional precaution, maybe not necessary, but nothing to lose. Now I think we are all thinking that it's a minimum precaution given the legal climate and the unpredictability of it. And so I think we do this anyway in our general documentation practices, or we try to only write what's necessary in order to keep the client's best interest in mind. The other benefit is that it allows me to say to a client when I'm first meeting them and doing informed consent that I don't record their status in their chart. And this is a small but important, I think, demonstration of awareness and of support. That said, you know, when I'm writing a U visa support letter, I'm assessing a psychological state of a client and releasing this information for the use, you know, by a court system. So in a case like that, it would be unethical not to include it in the chart. And so the question that I always come back to is it necessary in order for me to document the spirit and nature of what is most important to my documentation, as we try to ask with every client, right? And if not, then finding other ways to describe, such as legal stressors, family stressors, their socio-political, socio-cultural identities, etc. The other issue that I think is really something to be paying attention to in the therapy room and when we are supporting students and even gathering information about their identities with themselves and their families and their communities is to really address wellness with attention to those communities. So to give an example, I was working with a student who came in with really bad insomnia and anxiety about her family being safe. She was having recurring nightmares, especially about ICE. And what I'm hearing more often is not necessarily students feeling unsafe on campus, but rather feeling that, but really feeling that they are, that it's their families that are in a different location of California that, you know, that they're really worried about and that are experiencing a lot of anxiety and that are not feeling safe. And so she's having nightmares and not sleeping well and having a lot of anxiety. So we worked on some sleep hygiene, mindfulness, and breathing practices. And she was really engaged with some of the things. She was really open to trying these things, and yet there was a disconnect. There wasn't a sense of relief. And then as I learned more about her relationship with her parents, I learned she wasn't just holding her own anxiety. She was ruminating and really holding the stress that her parents were experiencing. They weren't sleeping well either. They weren't leaving their house, you know, other than to work and get food. And so in other words, it just wasn't just about how she was coping that mattered. So we spent a little time that session putting together some resources for them, including red cards in our family's his native language, and looking for a progressive muscle relaxation audio for her mom. She really liked doing it herself, so we look for one for her mom in her native language, etc. So when we talk about meeting clients where they are, part of it is honoring a sense of collective wellness, not just the individual. She's still coping with the deportation fear, but if I'd have encouraged her to focus only on herself in this kind of situation, there's no way she would have felt connected to me or to the work. The next point I have up here is around validating the pressure to uphold a good versus bad immigrant. So the term dreamer is one that I think a lot of students have a really positive relationship to and feel proud of, and that is really important to respect. And you know, in holding all of this and in holding what this means in this climate, and as we hear this term being tossed around, we should know that it's really built on an idea that they're the innocent ones who are also, you know, exceptional academically, and that's why they deserve a chance to succeed in this country. And we know that that's just a lot of pressure. The language we're hearing politically is very dichotomous: innocent versus criminal, automatic distinction between themselves and their parents, right? And a narrative that they have to exemplify personal and academic excellence. And then only then maybe do they deserve equity in our society, right? And so as mental health professionals, we get how unhealthy this dichotomous messaging can be, and the inherent conflict it poses in you know, a person's thinking about their primary caregivers. And we need to know this because some students are really grappling with this conflict and do feel shame about their family history, and because it could impact disclosure to us about complex family dynamics if they've internalized a society that already sees their parents as quote unquote bad people. So I want to talk a little bit about presenting concerns and resources. And things that I'm seeing come up a little more often given the current climate. Career anxiety and unknown future of DACA. I really can't overemphasize how I've seen and heard DACA change lives. Of course, in addition to deportation relief, DACA has really changed students' current and future employment possibilities, helped them build their resumes, helped their families more. And it's also motivated students to invest in careers that require work authorization. So for example, a lot of pre-health majors. And to be clear, DACA was not comprehensive immigration reform. It did not help all undocumented folks in this country. And we do have a lot of college students who do not have DACA. And technically we still have DACA, it's still in place, but given the climate, a lot of students really feel like they can't rely on the presence of it and that it's really unpredictable. And this is something for us to be thinking about in terms of, you know, the implications for adjustment and for loss of something that has been providing a lot of hope and a really huge stepping stone for the future for many of our undocumented students. And I contextualize this a lot as grief and loss. I think it can help normalize and contextualize what students are experiencing versus blaming themselves for what they're feeling. I'm of the mind that even if you don't identify as a career counselor, I think if you're doing mental health on a college campus, you're doing some career counseling. I think a big part of that process for us is educating ourselves about different careers and job opportunities for undocumented students. I put a link up for E4FC's Life After College Guide. I think it's a really good start if you find yourself really not knowing what some of the career paths or employment opportunities are for college students if they don't have DACA after college.
Hey, Diana.
Yes.
This is Taisha. I think we're having some technical difficulties. We can't see the slides that you're referencing. Can I get you to screen share again?
Yes.
Thank you. Great, we're with you now. Thank you.
Oh, sorry about that. Okay, and I apologize that you all can't see me. We have some issues with the video for me, but yeah. So just talked about increasing therapeutic trust, and now I'm talking about presenting concerns and resources, and these will also be available afterwards in terms of some of the links that I provided. So recommend checking out this resource. And one more thing I think that I just wanted to say about that is, in addition to understanding this and helping students navigate the career anxiety, I really see us as advocates for the career resources that are available on our campuses for them. We recognize that as a system, at least on our campus, we've, myself and one of my colleagues at the Undocumented Student Program, we've really been brainstorming and talking with our colleagues over at the Career Center, and realizing that as a system, we just have not been equipped to support undocumented students' unique career challenges as much as we should be. So we're trying to build a stronger partnership that supports their efforts to really they want to become better allies, they want to understand more, and to create a network of information that makes their resources even more useful for undocumented students. So we've started to do things like hold self-employment workshops, creating LinkedIn resources for them, et cetera. I want to talk a little bit about stereotype threat and academic performance. You know, since the election, a very common theme I've heard students describe for themselves is a change in their class participation and feeling more insecure about speaking up, about going to office hours, about confirming negative stereotypes. And while I think there's probably a lot of factors going into that, including, you know, depression and anxiety, we know that stereotypes about immigrants have never been so amplified in mainstream media. And I probably don't have to review what those stereotypes are. We don't have any studies that have looked at stereotype threat in undocumented students, but we know through just a large body of Claude Steele's research and others that when students from marginalized groups feel like they're at risk of confirming a negative stereotype about their group, this can harm academic performance. We have a lot of evidence of this. What I put up here is a link. Stanford's School of Ed put together a handout that lists empirically validated strategies to reduce stereotype threat. My colleague here at UC Berkeley, Germán Cadenas, introduced me to one activity that we've used in workshops and I've used individually. It's a values affirmations activity, but there are plenty that I think we can adapt and use during this time. And even just teaching students, I think, about stereotype threat, which we know can be a powerful intervention in and of itself, again, to help contextualize and externalize what might be getting in the way of some of their ability to concentrate and some of their ability to perform in this climate. To speak a little bit to discrimination and xenophobia, you know, we're not just seeing this happen in politics, right? It's happening on our campuses. At UC Berkeley, we've seen xenophobic visual displays, students getting targeted on social media, getting trolled. All these things have been present since even before the election. The Institute for Study and Promotion of Race and Culture put out this really great article and Racism Recovery Plan STEP outline, and they call it #racial trauma is real. If you haven't seen it, I would really highly encourage folks to check it out. I know I've really leaned on it as a framework for teaching students the impact of race and othering-based stress, and it's a tool that they can use to help sort of conceptualize and create their own way of coping with the stressors in an ongoing way. Highly recommend this as a resource. Want to say a few more things about deportation. I spoke a little bit about one client I worked with. You know, I think we all have our different styles of working with anxiety, but I think psychoed in particular about the process and helping to, again, externalize and contextualize the process, and somatic interventions I've found to work really well. Having red cards available is really important. And the ILRC has put out a family preparedness plan. Other legal resource groups are also recommending that undocumented and mixed status families put together these family preparedness plans. And, you know, they involve really frightening things that I think any of us would experience if we had to put a plan like this together, such as establishing who would take responsibility for your child if you're reported, things like that, really forcing families to think of worst case scenarios. So I think we should be familiar with what this process could look like. One, this is a good resource to share with students in case they're looking for something like this. And two, because it's a process that we can understandably see brings up a lot of distress. And many of our students act as legal and language brokers and may be directly involved in this process as well. I'm aware of time and some of the technical difficulties I've had. I want to, if I have time, come back to narrative therapy and speak a little bit about that. But I want to jump to just speak a little bit about artistic expression as something to just keep in mind when working with undocumented students. Art has played a really big role in the immigrant rights movement. And that makes sense, right? Because it's an expression of voice that can't be wrong. It can't be silenced. In this country, undocumented students hear the message that their voice doesn't matter, or especially now that using it is dangerous. So interventions and coping strategies that help really amplify voice and expression are quite powerful. My colleague at UC Davis, Esmeralda Zamudio, has been facilitating a Mandala art therapy group just for undocumented students. I think that's a really great way to sort of access this part of their experience and really help empower them through their own voice and expression. Obviously, I'm not a lawyer. I am not here to give legal advice, and certainly don't give legal advice to our students, but I want to say a few things about things that as clinicians, those of us that are clinicians, should just be aware of during this really stressful time. First of all, we know that times of distress alone can cause the triggering of unresolved trauma. So it makes sense, right, that this time might be causing unresolved trauma, past trauma, migration trauma to really be coming up for students. In addition, our students have been doing, and their families, they've been doing exactly what legal experts have told them, right? To seek legal counsel and get an immigration status sort of checkup, like a wellness checkup for your immigration status, legal status, to see if you're eligible for other ways of adjustment based on perhaps a survivorhood, victimization experience. And of course, this could be empowering. It can bring some hope because their trauma is being given voice through the legal system. And as mental health providers, we understand the impact, right, of reliving traumatic events. I work with Perna Lal and some folks over at East Bay Community Law Center. They do an amazing job of working with students that are going through these processes. And they're really aware that exposure and having to retell these events can be really emotionally impactful. They do the best to mitigate the impact of this, and it still doesn't change that students have to go through and still go through in specific detail the events that they've gone through. And so just something to really keep in mind. Sometimes it's a clear referral, so a student may tell you, I'm here because my lawyer recommended it. My lawyer sent me here. Other times it's not the presenting concern, but it's still important to assess for because it could inform our assessment of symptoms and really gear treatment differently. So it's something that I try to ask about in the intake process, if they're currently working with anything in particular. With UNT visas, something also to be aware of, they're asked to provide a letter of support from a mental health care provider. Again, this is where a client might be retelling their trauma for the purposes of a legal process and may not have otherwise been ready or equipped with coping strategies. So I think it's a delicate navigation of understanding what the student's really ready to process and what's required for them to process in order to get documentation. And ideally, if nothing else, even if they don't want counseling ongoing, some basic psychoed on how to deal with the processes that they're going through. I want to say, I just want to refer folks to the report of the APA Presidential Task Force on Immigration. It's something that I know I've used. Dr. Suarez Orozco and Dr. Casas are co-authors on this publication, so we're really fortunate to be hearing from them today. I think it's a really great resource for conceptualizing trauma for immigrants. And again, keeping in mind that assessing for trauma is important because during these times, I think it could appear as acute distress related to current stressors. But if there's a trauma past that's also being triggered, then obviously that is going to inform a treatment plan a little differently. So I don't want to spend too much time talking about this. I know that our presenters down the line are going to talk more about what it means to build an undocu-friendly campus, but a few things that I do want to say: informal consultation. Happy to, share folks our model a little bit later, but essentially providing spaces and opportunities for folks to seek counseling without having to open up a chart, so that it's anonymous and confidential and not connected to a chart or any kind of documentation if that's what they want, and as long as risk isn't involved. Building a range of support opportunities. It's just not a one-size-fits-all. What works one term may not work another term. If you put together a program or a workshop or a support group and students don't come, that doesn't mean they don't need the support. It just means we haven't quite figured out what they need at this time. And I think it's on us to keep working with them and listening to them to figure out what that could actually look like. And finally, I'll say I appreciate hearing before about our students being worried about their interactions with law enforcement, because I think we can all appreciate, why undocumented immigrants would have a really, perhaps complicated, to say the least, relationship towards law enforcement right now. I think, as clinicians, engaging with law enforcement and recommending that students engage with law enforcement is something that comes up, say, when we are encouraging them or suggesting that they might report victimization, or they want to request a welfare check on a peer that they're worried about. So these are all things to be sensitive to when recommending, if you're not feeling safe, call 911. Well, it could be there could be more for students to be considering when they're in a situation like that. There's also an unavoidable role of law enforcement during 5150. Again, something else that we come into contact with on our campuses from day to day. And so while keeping students safe, I think, is still a priority, I think we can be sensitive to this interaction and work to minimize potential distress that can come up. So at UC Berkeley, one thing we've done is we've enlisted the support from UCPD, our mental health liaisons, their law enforcement officers, detective, I believe they're both lieutenants, and but they come to school most days in casual clothing and civilian clothing. They drive unmarked cars. And so we've set something up for them so that if we have to do a 5150 with an undocumented student, especially from a more public place on campus, if they're available, they've been willing to come, they've agreed to come and do the 5150 with us. Still doesn't change the fact that sometimes, unfortunately, law enforcement does have to be involved, and this can be traumatic for any of our students. But it is a way to minimize how scary this can be given the current climate right now. And then finally, I know I'm out of time before turning it over. I just want to say, as I said in the beginning, this is really one clinician's experience. I don't think any of us have all the answers, but I do think we have a responsibility to recognize our positionality and the power that we do have in our institutions to support them. And I do think it's on us to create the conditions for them to navigate these difficult times. And I think it's going to require us to continue to be creative and to listen and to do more of what they're asking. I'm going to stop there. Thank you so much for dealing with the technical difficulties we had. And now I have the honor of turning the program over to Dr. Manuel Casas, and I'll be around for Q&A later.
Hello.
Hi, we can hear you. Hold on, we're just trying to get your video up. 1 second.
Okay, I'll just go get started, given the time element. First of all, I'm pleased to have gotten the invitation from both Taisha and Alina to be here this afternoon. I've had quite a bit of personal and professional experience working in the community, at the university, and in my capacity as a professor, and in my capacity as a community activist in the local community as such. And so my comments are coming to you from both the practical and somewhat more of the, I might want to call it more of the guiding type of principles, the type of some of the ideas that Dr. Pena so nicely put out, that, talking about hope and talking about the self-image and these aspects also. I will not venture into the actual interventions because I think Dr. Orozco will probably be touching on that, and I think Dr. Pena has done an excellent job also of exploring that. One of the things as I give you my comments, some of them are coming from how the heart, and others are coming from a paper that I put together. And so I will be pretty flexible as to how I cover the material.
Dr. Costa, sorry to interrupt. This is Taisha. Can you accept my request to start your video?
You're telling me that. Okay. You got it.
Thank you. We see you now.
Oh, are you sure you want to? Anyway, as I was saying, I approach this topic both from a very personal and also from my professional activities as such. I really like that last saying or poem that was presented by Dr. Pena, the one by Rinko Sen, and that really captures the major thrust of of what I have to say. I've entitled my little presentation, Si se pudo, si se puede. And I got this poem that just crossed my desk, and unfortunately, I can't find the source. It was one of those things that is passed out somewhere, and as I was reviewing it the other day, as I was looking for materials, I came across it, and I said, it really sets the pace for me and the tone of what the topic is that we're talking about. And the poem is entitled, Where Did the Time Go? And it starts off with, where did the time go? The time when life was simple, the time when time moved slow, the time when life was stress-free, the time I no longer know, the time when we respected others' rights, the time when we talked, not engaged in fights, the time when we didn't target the innocent, the time when the bad ones were actually sent to prison, the time when we were blind to ethnicity, race, and color, the time when we loved and embraced each other, the time when we wished all the American dream and prosperity, the time we saved immigrants seeking sanctuary, not trying to throw them back across the sea, the time we once strived for but now no longer know. Who knew 365 days would be a time so long ago? Let's take a stand and go back to a more peaceful time, so we'll never have to ask again, where did the time go? I think that sort of sets the pace for me in regards to how did we get ourselves here? And what is presently happening that keeps this whole thing alive for us, that we cannot just walk away from it and we cannot just ignore it. I think, since the election, and even prior to that, the activities that were going on and the situation relative to being an immigrant and being undocumented, I mean, they were hitting us in the face, and they absolutely hit us after November. And even though they talk about softening things, we know that they don't just go after people who are criminals, supposedly. We know the case of Maribel Trujillo, who was picked up, taken away from her family, and so forth. So the reality hits us every day, if on CNN or whatever newscast we see. Some authors will talk about the fact that while things are taking off, they're taking off rather slowly. And that's because, those of you who read the LA Times, the article this weekend was one of that Trump can't possibly do what he wants to do because of the lack of resources. In this particular article, it's not just the monetary resources, but also the resources relative to the people they're going to employ to carry out the work, the people who are going to shuffle the papers. And so some of the leaders in our communities, and I speak a lot for the Latino community, which is the one that I identify the most with, are talking about that during this interim, if we can call it that, we have the time to really think and get our acts together and really move forward as such. And a good example, I think, of the things that people can do, we don't have to talk about just a mass movement, but there are some things that each of us, individuals, can actually take if we have the right mindset. And I'll be referring that to that mindset of empowerment, the mindset of I can do it, others have done it. Si se pudo, I can too. So I look at the fact of The young man, Juan Manuel Montes, the 23-year-old person who was also a part of the DACA program, who was picked up and deported. Now, there's controversy whether he was here, there, or anywhere else, but the fact of the matter is, you take a look at this individual, and he didn't stand still. He actually brought a suit against Trump, and he's carrying it to the courts regarding that he was given the right by Obama under the DACA program to be able to stay here and study. And this young man, I think, is very motivational. I think it could be motivational not only for people like him, but also for students on our individual campuses as such. Here you have a young man who has some kind of disability because of an accident he had while working in the fields. He continues to work in the fields, is my understanding, and also at the same time, and he does so to support his family. And he's going to school, to a community college, to become a welder. Well, individuals like that are really serve, to me, the example that it doesn't take, you don't have to have higher levels of education to stand up for your rights and also to use the system to move forward. And those of us who are privileged enough to have that information, to have those contacts, then, you know, let's move, this is where the social justice comes in. Let's reach out and help those who are not so easily, don't have access as easily as some individuals have to the services that we provide our students in regards to the legal components or in regard to counseling and so forth. These other brothers and sisters also need that kind of help. And as such, I think it behooves us to see that how our work that we do can be taken out to the community as such. Now, in preparing for this seminar, I took the time to identify the types of programs and interventions that have been developed in support of immigrant students on the respective campuses. And I can really say, you know, to share a personal background here, I was a student at UC Berkeley in 1959. I was at that time, and I still am, a Mexican immigrant. At that time, there were no resources like the ones that were described so nicely by Dr. Pena. And yet, there was some of us, very small, who kept going and going in spite of the fact that you might not see another Mexican in days because they were not there. And that was not that long ago. Even, you know, 1959, it used to be a long time ago, but now to me it's like, hey, it was not that long ago. So we have to take into consideration the aspect of the fact how far we've come in regards to the services for students. Thank God we've got those services. They built up over a period of time. And through a lot of efforts of persons like myself, I can honestly, again, also say that I was the first person of color, counseling psychologist, PhD, hired in the UC system at a counseling center in 1976. So even in 1976, we would not have had the kind of persons that that are talking today, being able to help move the thing, our efforts along relative to those more in need or those who needed the help. And I really want to underscore that, and I underscore that throughout my comments here, is that we have a lot of role models out there. Maybe they're not as visible as they could be, but boy, we could learn a lot about what was being done 25, 35, 45 years ago when the resources and the bodies weren't there. We're still short, but if we engender in the young, in those of you who are students, if we engender those particular elements of wanting to fight for justice and moving forward, it can be done. Let me catch up with myself here. So, I was going to go into some of the problems that individuals encounter with these particular laws and policies and so forth. But again, given the time and also the good job that's been done till now, I'm just going to jump over that and just say that there is as exemplified by the examples provided by Dr. Pena, there's also quite a bit of literature on good interventions that can be used to meet the needs of the undocumented and documented immigrant students here in this country. So again, I won't repeat them. I'll refer you, however, to the book that she mentioned, which was the American Psychological Association's book on immigrants. And I think it's in the invitation itself, it's cited as such, or you can get the reference. It's a good source, and you can easily track it down. One of the areas that I would, even though I'm not, as I said, I refer you to that book to get information on the therapeutic intervention. One area that I will direct attention to in the therapeutic arena is that looking at preferred intervention should not actually emphasizes the fact that preferred intervention should not solely be driven by the presenting symptoms, but given the social political nature of the underlying causes of the presenting problems or presenting symptoms, problems, the intervention should be driven by philosophical precepts or worldviews and guiding principles that look at the problems contextually from a comprehensive, dynamic, and totalistic perspective. That's where I think, again, the previous comments, we not only have a personal issue, it is a community issue, it is a national issue, and we have to look at the problem from the larger perspective. We may start with a problem, but that problem should open up, as the example was given relative to the young lady who suffered from insomnia, not being able to sleep as such. Well, we can deal with that problem and leave it there, or we can see that that problem is tied to community issues, family issues, and so forth. And do we prevent by looking at the problem in its holistic way, or do we just put a patch on it for now? And I contend that no, we have to go beyond that and actually, as many of you are doing, look at it more from the total system, the total context in which the problem works. And in doing so, one of the aspects of working in that component, there's I really emphasize the aspect that counselors should focus on helping the student develop a positive, forward-looking mindset and a broad range of life skills that will enable the student to effectively deal with a lifetime of problem solving and decision making. In essence, to help the student develop their personal philosophy of life. In pursuit of such a goal, I would personally turn to the ideas of Fanon and Frankl and Camus and Freire to guide my work. And I also, when I work with people and who are into reading and have the time time and luxury to actually read, again, these are individuals whose ideas, I think, mean something to them and can help them to understand the situations in which they live. In seeking to do that, one of the goals that I keep in mind also that keeps me moving in that direction is that the quote that Camus put forth in one of his books, in which he says, "In the midst of winter, I found there was within me an invincible summer." Again, it's that aspect that we should be working with students to look within themselves. That doesn't mean they don't need help. That doesn't mean we don't need resources. But the essence of what they bring within themselves is what's going to make it happen or not happen. From another perspective, to increase our effectiveness in helping our students, it is important to identify and make use of their culturally rooted psychological and behavioral resiliencies and strengths and mindsets that have successfully served them and their families over time. I'm sorry, I have to deal with my eyes sometimes because I do suffer from Bell's palsy, and my eyes sometimes want to function and sometimes they don't. Then again, hey, that's my problem, and I have learned to deal with it, and I move forward on that. More specifically, in order to strengthen the student's confidence and self-efficacy to confront and effectively deal with prevailing challenges, there is a need to help them understand their potential by putting such resiliency into a historical, lifelong, and ongoing perspective. They are not the first in their families or communities to suffer the pangs of racism and anti-immigration policies and practices. In fact, they are where they are because someone did suffer or sacrifice for them. By speaking with their families, community leaders, etc., there is much to learn about life and how to effectively deal with adversity. So even within your own community, your own family, the sense of strength, the sense of information, the directions, listen. I know, I work with my grandchildren. I call them my grandchildren because I help raise them, a group of them. And, one of the things as youngsters, they're in college, is the most famous words I hear from them are, let me have a drink here. The most famous words are, after I've talked to them and I'm telling them about life, is, I know. And I'm saying, no, you don't know. But they're not going to listen anymore. But I do have to approach them from the perspective that I've got to work a little harder. Because while I might think I know, they may not think I know. So that's where we have to develop those good sense of communications to be able to breach between or tie in between generations. We've heard this before. It takes a village. Well, it has a lot of meaning again. I think it's always meant a lot, especially in our communities. It takes a community. It takes a city block. It takes a group of friends, and they're the source by which we can develop the students, develop ourselves. Practically speaking, with these thoughts in mind, one might consider supporting and facilitating family community groups on campus or in the community itself. I suggest this possibility because I firmly believe that the pursuit of education by immigrants should result in coming closer to family, community, and culture and not a moving away from them. What if more students volunteered or were able to get units for serving as mentors and role models for those kids who presently are fearful for going to school because of their immigration status? I mean, I was rather surprisingly happy today to hear that President Obama was giving his first presentation today, and that the focus of it was going to be on student or activation and getting students involved in the system and so forth. I mean, that's exactly what is necessary. But we have to have develop the mindset that it's worth getting involved, that there is going to be some payoff, not just personal payoff, but community payoff, family payoff, that you really engage them in regards to believing and not letting them lose hope again. And that takes time. We don't have, the essence of time. We just don't have all that time. So it means that we don't take it for granted. We don't take it for granted, whatever you're dealing with students, at least from my experience, that what you say is going to occur. It needs to be really shaped and molded and brought to fruition. I think an example that comes to mind is, and I'm running groups and so forth voluntarily since quite a bit, since November. I do it for my community. I've always done it as a community activist. I've been on the mental health commission. I've been the only Latino in the Mental Health Commission in Santa Barbara for 40 years. 40 years. They have not been able to find another Latino to serve on it, but that doesn't matter. I was on that commission until November. During the elections, I was bounced out or not reassigned. I wasn't running for office. But again, the reason is that I was too outspoken, and I was trying to bring about change in mental health, as I've always worked for, especially for Latino families and children, and that I was just pushing too hard, and that they just weren't gonna, they didn't need that voice in there. But I mean, that is a necessary voice that is necessary if we are to accomplish our goals and objectives. And sometimes you'll run across, there are hurdles that you're going to run across. We have our down days, and the students will have their down days. And luckily, I'm surrounded by good friends that either through the telephone or through this computer or whatever, will put me in line, if you will, regarding some of the things that I'm talking about, and say, listen to yourself. But in one case, Dr. Marcella, who was a founder of cross-cultural psychology, turned to me one day when I was complaining to him and about how things was going bad. Personally and professionally, I wasn't happy, and this and that. And then, he just stopped. We talk a lot, and he says, why don't you get with it? He says, your great-grandmother, he had to remind me of these things. And I think this is the type of thing we have to remind our students also of their roots when I talk about their cultural strengths. He had to remind me, he says, your great-grandmother was an Apache whose village was burned down by the cavalry, right? Right. And luckily enough, your great-grandfather, who was older than her, he was a little girl when this occurred, he used to drive the wagon trains from northern Mexico to Sacramento. On the way back, he encountered the burnt village and found this little girl, put her on with the rest of the wagon trains, moved to Mexico. So she was deported from the U.S. as a little girl, you might say. She was deported. And his family, his extended family, raised the little girl. As they grew older, they fell in love, I guess, and got married and so forth. So it was like a reminder that says, do you think she had it easy? And also, she made it possible for you to be here today. For me to be here talking as an immigrant, talking to you today, who would have believed it?
Hi, Dr. Casas. This is Taisha. Sorry, just a little pressed for time. Can we do a 30-second wrap-up to move on to our next presenter?
Sure. So it brings us into that aspect of saying the component of building within the individuals the strengths, whether we want to call it resiliency or other aspects, is that you have to work at it, though. You have to work at building these particular assets. They don't automatically happen. And a good person that many of you know, another good friend who reminds me of this in even a more shorter form of, get with it. Let's get acting. It's not the end of the world right now. It's not good, but we can move it, is my friend Thomas Parham, the Vice Chancellor down at UC Irvine. And only his line is even more direct, and it stings even more, especially for people of color and Black people in particular, African American people. It's the aspect of saying when things are complaining, and he says, okay, he says, it ain't a slave ship. So let's get moving again. So that's, the message I really want to leave with you is the aspect of we need to really engender the inner strengths of the individual so they can access those beautiful programs that you have in each of your respective campuses, and to engender the desire to continue to strive, even in spite of the obstacles that are put in our way, that, no, your ancestors, your brothers and sisters have overcome these, and so can you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Casas. I'm going to turn us over now to Dr. Carola Suarez Orozco.
Good. Hello, everyone. How are you? I'm delighted to join you, and thank you very much for organizing this important session for us all. I'm going to try to bring up my slides as quickly and efficiently as possible, which are now hiding somewhere. Sorry about this. They were here a moment ago, and now they've pulled away. Sorry. Oh, here they are. Okay, just want to pull these up. All right, so thank you very much for joining us. Technology is a wonderful thing, except when it doesn't want to work. All right. Okay, good. All right, so what I'd like to do, and I'm going to apologize because I'm going to have to talk rather quickly today because I have a class at 1 o'clock. So I have a class full of students who are waiting for me, so I won't be able to stay with you for the Q&A, although I would be very happy to entertain questions afterwards. So what I wanted to do today is talk to you a little bit about some findings from a national survey of undocumented college students, in which our research team asked undocumented students about their experiences and challenges, as well as the advice that they would give to those of us who are serving them on campus. So what I'm going to do is start with a kind of an overview of what we should know about these students, and very fast forward give you some information about the survey itself, so you have some perspective and trust in what we did. And then I want to get to the most important core of all this, which is what did students tell us and what advice do they have for us. So undocumented students are a growing population on our campuses. The Urban Institute estimates that there are about 225,000 undocumented students, and they make up about, across the nation, and they make up about 2% of our students. There's a lot of evidence that well, not a lot of evidence, but growing evidence coming out of some of the safe campuses, like UC Berkeley, UC LA, I'm proud to say, some of the private schools on the East Coast, where there are relative densities of folks, a lot on the coasts, if you will, almost nothing in the center of the country, not a ton on community colleges, and primarily from the Latino point of view. We know a lot less about other groups of students, although we know that undocumented folk come from lots of different backgrounds. So undocumented students are hard to reach in a vulnerable population, and as such, they're rather invisible in what kind of the overall perspective we have. They have warranted trust issues, and when we do research, we need to guarantee their safety and their anonymity and confidentiality. So what the aim of our study, the Undocu Scholar study, was to reach a national sample, and we sought to get a range, to get the sense of a range of student experiences. Sorry, whoops, I'm sorry, okay, well, let me see if I can get back there. For some reason, I'm having interference with my mouse. So it goes from nothing to, sorry. Can you give me control? I'm sorry, Taisha, can you give me control of my mouse? It's not. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so we wanted to learn about experiences. We wanted to challenge false assumptions and damaging misperceptions. We wanted to inform campus practice and services, as well as to inform national policy. And what we did is we used a community-based participatory action research approach with, sorry, but for some reason, and we wanted to, we used and we worked with community organizations. So our strategy of recruitment was to, we set up a website, and about 3 months before we started the survey, we put up lots of helpful resources. We made some videos, and we had a social media campaign to kind of let folks know what was going on in our community orgs, as well as our student advisory board really helped get the word out. So our question types, we had multiple choice questions, asking around demographic questions, some standardized scales, and as well as some open-ended questions. So a little bit about the demography of our participants. 909 participated. They ranged, we had folks from all sorts of backgrounds. They came from 34 states and 246 post-secondary institutions, including 2-year and 4-year colleges, public, private, as well as, and some of them were highly selective, some were moderately selective, and some were non-selective. So we got perspectives from lots of backgrounds. The age of our participants ranged from 18 to 30, with a mean age of 21. 54% of our participants were female, and they arrived to the country anywhere from as small infants to the age of 16, with a mean age of arrival of 6.4 years of age, and they were 93%. Were single. And here we see all those countries of origin that were represented, and specifically 55 different countries were represented. And we had a benchmark survey that was done by the Migration Policy Institute that had looked at DACA participants. Now, not all of our participants had DACA, and so it's not an exact benchmark, but it was close enough. As you can see, our sample looked fairly similar. Our survey was the blue line, the benchmark was the teal line. So we felt pretty good that our sample might be fairly representative of who's out there. In terms of regions. So more about our particular sample. Most were first generation to college, 68%. 32% of the participants had parents who had some college. Financial concerns were a huge issue, not surprisingly, for this population. You can see that only 5% said they were not concerned about tuition or fees, and only a small percent did not express concern about buying books and supplies for class. And here I'm going to start giving you some quotes that emerged from the data, because I think there's nothing more powerful than hearing the voices of students. Financing my education, there are limited scholarships, and financial aid barely covers tuition costs. I got accepted into UC Berkeley, which was my dream school, but I was not able to attend because I was not able to get enough money for scholarships to go. It was so heartbreaking knowing how hard I'd worked in high school and still not being able to go. Now, the quotes I give you are representative quotes. There are lots of others like them. But in the interest of time, I'm giving you kind of a sense of what was going on. And many of the students talked about feeling left out of campus life, and in a multitude of ways. So because they lacked financial aid, they weren't able to live on campus. And we know there's lots of evidence that shows that living on campus serves to make students feel like they're integrated into what's going on campus. Here's another quote: not being able to participate in many college experiences like studying abroad, interning in certain programs, getting academic jobs, and being able to travel with certain organizations are some of the other ways in which they felt left out. Now, I'm a clinical psychologist by training, though I haven't worked as a clinician for many, many years. But I was interested in getting a sense of their anxiety levels. As I suspected, they would be very high. We used the GAD-7, which is a brief self-report for generalized anxiety disorder, and it's been normed on 21 over 2,000 individuals ranging in ages from 18 to 95, including Latinos, and it's been used in a number of studies with Latinos. It's a 7-item scale with a classic item is over the last 2 weeks, how often have you been bothered with not being able to stop? Well, I can't, there's something blocking what it says. Not being able to stop worrying. It's on a 4-point scale, not at all, several days a week, more than half of the days of the week, every day. And you get a sum score of 0 to 21 with a clinical cutoff score of 10. So that's just to give you a sense of what it is. And here's what we found. So the norm score is the light blue. And the entire sample were on our sample of undocumented students, and the lavender bar are Latino and Latina undocumented students. So you see that the males are nearly 7 times higher than the norm sample, and the females are roughly 5 times higher. And that the Latinos have an even higher rate than the overall group when compared to undocumented students. And I think we can speculate that that has to do with the fact that Latinos are much more under the vigilance of the deportation machinery. MALDEF has lots of data and evidence around that. Okay, so here's how it sounds. Self-reported anxiety. Quite frankly, I went through depression and anxiety due to my immigration status. And I completely concur with Dr. Pena, who noted that while students will sometimes present with concerns about themselves, in fact, more often they were concerned with issues around their own family member being, potentially deported. So I have anxiety and depression issues, and I feel like being undocumented, along with having family issues. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm jumping the gun. So these are ways in which anxiety feels is presented amongst this population. And one of the things that contributes to the anxiety are stresses around juggling. So they're juggling, for example, I'm always tired because I'm working, there's no energy, I commute and work, I take the bus to school, so so it takes up a lot of my time, and I could be using to study or do homework. I have 2 jobs, and then I'm scared of not passing my classes. So there's sort of the notion that they're juggling too many balls and they're afraid they're going to drop one. So and here's the point I was trying to make and concurring with Dr. Benya. So our students will talk about this constant fear of being deported because I don't have DACA and legal battles on one hand, but more often we heard and saw things like being afraid of my parents being deported on any random day. And when we did quantitative analyses, and we had a scale of fears of deportation about self and fears of deportation about loved ones, we found that being afraid of being deported themselves contributed to anxiety even more than being afraid for themselves. And in fact, the students who had DACA had higher levels of anxiety than students who didn't have DACA, which was rather counterintuitive. And what we found was it had to do with feeling that they had exposed their family members. So other things that contribute to anxiety and uncertainty about the future, it is difficult to know I'm being held back by something outside of my control. We know that not something you can control, your destiny contributes to anxiety. Worrying about the future, employment, going out to employers as undocumented, is another example. It's not just stressful, but also depressing for any human being not being able or motivated to think, dream, or plan the future. The title of a forthcoming paper, by the way. So exclusion was another issue, and Dr. Benya talked about it in terms of xenophobia and racism. The stress of being looked down upon for not being legal, being scared that people will discriminate against me for it or treat me differently because of it. My biggest challenge is being accepted by my peers. I feel hopeless, isolated, and unable to fit in or be part of society. And yet at the same time, they had a huge sense of longing to belong. Not having the same rights and benefits as my peers make me feel like a foreigner, even though I now feel close to the US culture, closer to the US culture, that's a typo, than to my Mexican culture. I was raised here. It is my home sweet home. So why is it wrong for me to want to stay, serve, help, and work here? I too love the USA, want to be a citizen, and have freedom. They called for a search for allies. One of the biggest challenges is knowing who I can turn to for help and to understand my undocumented status as a college student. Not having a safe space where I can express my feelings about being undocumented. Finding people that I can connect with and people I can trust. So one of the questions we asked was, if you could give advice to folks on campus trying to help undocumented students, what were some of the things that you would suggest? And here's the comprehensive list of items that, when we collapsed all the quotes, and, these are topical. I'm going to highlight just a few of these in the interest of time. And they appear in the report that is here. So one of the big issues is, and then along with what Dr. Pena mentioned to us, listen to our stories. We do need money to solve our problems, but lots of the time. But what we also need is people to understand what we're going through and are willing to support us through it. Listen to the student population. If there are students who are openly declaring their status, have a conversation with them. Another theme, be empathetic. Realize that you have a very important influence on students, especially undocumented students, so be sensitive, non-judgmental, patient, motivating, and above all, a person that is approachable and trustworthy. Be very sensitive to the student situation and treat them with respect and kindness. Everyone deserves that. Then they asked for exactly what's happening today, and that's why I'm so pleased to be participating. Training faculty and staff. They really need to train staff in all the laws that pertain to undocumented students and what they go through in the educational system. Provide staff support and financial aid and advising, because they often got a lot of misinformation. Train staff, faculty, etc., on how to work with undocumented students and what language to cut out of their vocabulary, i.e. illegal. Provide equity of treatment. Treat us all the same. I can tell when I'm treated like an immigrant. Treat everyone equally, no matter what race, religion, social status, or legal status. We are all the same. No one is better than others. Then they gave an important cautionary note, again alluded to by Dr. Pena, but something that not all, psychologists are trained to think about privacy issues. Not everybody on campus is equally well trained. So they said, they should develop a code of confidentiality that makes students feel safe to express what they're going through. To college administrators that work with and support undocumented students, please respect our privacy. Don't disclose our status to colleagues, friends, and other students. Also, don't pressure us to disclose our status, our story, or participate in activities that would lead us to disclosing ourselves. They talked about the need for safe zones. Make a student center dedicated for undocumented students. A lot of schools have an LGBT office in which LGBT students come and talk about their issues. It would be a great support system on campuses. Most undocumented students live in fear and are embarrassed of revealing their immigration status. Therefore, it would be great if campuses could have a place where students can feel safe and are not targeted. There should be more clubs focusing on providing more support along with information. So one of the questions in the survey was, if there are undocumented support services on campus, have you made use of the services? 73% said yes. So if your campus doesn't have one, please put one together. And then we asked how important those organizations were for the students, and a little over 70% responded that it was very important or important to them. The other thing I'd point out is we can, as faculty members, as anyone serving these young people, we can provide personal safe zones. As one student said, be open so undocumented students are aware that they are safe spaces. And the way we can do that is just by having, just like when, in the early days of the LGBT movement, we would have rainbows on our doors to let folks know this was a safe zone. We can have this sign or signs like it on our doors to let people know we are a safe person to talk to, even if it's not a formal center. They also asked for providing counseling. So, thank you and kudos for today. I want colleges to have all counselors be knowledgeable about the undocumented struggle and understand how difficult it actually is for that student to be in the school. It is discouraging to speak to counselors who know nothing about our situation. Training mental health professionals is key. So again, thank you for this. So this is a brief thank you to all the folks who worked on this study. But I want to end today, before I turn it over to my esteemed colleague, who will address the issues even better than I, a couple of issues under the new Trump administration ethos. So we have greater uncertainty than ever before. This study was done about 1.5 years ago under the Obama administration, where there were 400,000 folks a year being deported. So it was a time of uncertainty, right? But now it's worse than ever. I think it's fair to say, and all we have to do is look at the news reports to understand that. So what are we seeing? We're seeing lots more students coming to our office and worried. But I want to point out to a couple of related risk groups that we may not be thinking about. And these are documented students who, aren't immediately deported. They're not deportable, but they live in constant worry about their siblings and parents and loved ones who are under that threat. So they're living in mixed status homes. They're also, I'm hearing increasingly concerns from folks who were formerly undocumented and now are under protected status and are feeling this tremendous, for lack of better terminology until we know better, survivor guilt. And the sense of, why me? And the sense of what do I do? And how do I step up? And the kind of emotional issues that come up with that. I agree entirely with Dr. Pena, who talked about the family preparation. I can't say that word. I call them contingency plans, but family plans to be prepared. I'm glad to know that there's actually a formal resource out there. I hadn't seen that, so I'm going to add that to my list. We need to be helping folks think through, what needs to be done. One of my students who is in that category of formerly undocumented has guardianship of 6 young children across her mixed family status home, just in case. And lastly, I would say that through 2 more things. We need to make sure students know their rights, and there's lots of resources that I'm sure my colleague is going to talk about, and this is one. And lastly, I'm hearing a lot of, I think it's important that we as a community are ready to mobilize in case of deportation hearings. I'm hearing that judges are sometimes swayed by seeing folks in the courtroom across the community, not just the families and the immediate community, but people from the university and people from all over, people from the church, people from all over saying, hey, these folks are not isolated. We'll notice if you take them away. And I think that it's kind of an immoral obligation for us to be thinking about stepping up in this and in any ways that we can. So I'm now turning it over. I wish I could stay longer. I'm sorry that I had to kind of fast forward through this, but I now turn it over to the able and capable hands of my colleague, Daniel Arturo Alfonso Arellano. Bienvenido.
Thank you for that introduction. I also apologize in advance because I have an appointment with the student pretty soon, and right now my priority is to meet with my students, particularly because of this political climate. I want to complement what all the other presenters have said. Their legal, their clinical, historical, and research perspective with what I'm seeing on the ground, the one-on-one interactions that I'm seeing with students. Pre-election, I was meeting on average with 3 to 5 students a week. We were seeing some anti-immigrant messaging on our campus, messaging, chalking specifically, that was in support of the now president and his policies. And that was very controlled. Even the meetings with the students were very, very controlled. Like I said, maybe 3 to 5 meetings a week with students who had those questions. What's going to happen with me if Trump wins the election? What's going to happen to my DACA status? What's going to happen to the financial aid that I receive from school? And then what's going to happen to my parents? Is it true that we're going to see increased enforcement? Post-election, that's still the same thing that I'm seeing, but a much higher level. At UCSD, I'm working with a group of 300 undocumented students. This number, we base it on the number of students who are receiving the California DREAM Act financial aid, which is a financial aid that's specific for undocumented students. And now, instead of seeing 3 to 5 students per week, I'm seeing anywhere between 15 and 20 students with those same questions. Now that Trump is the president, what's going to happen to my DACA? He said during his campaign that he was going to get rid of it. Can I still renew my DACA? What's going to happen to advanced parole? I had plans of going studying abroad. Can I still do that? And so the concerns are still there. I have students who come to see me wanting to leave our campus because of our particular location and our proximity to the border. If you are familiar with San Diego, we have one border, which is the border with Mexico, and we have a few internal checkpoints between the LA and, for example, and San Diego. And so for many of our students, this is a concern to them because it prevents them from going back and forth to visit their family members, and it prevents their family members from coming over and seeing them. So I've had questions of how can I transfer out of UCSD? This is my first year, but I want to do that. Can UCSD provide any protections for my family members as if they decide to come to San Diego? And so students are concerned. These are very valid concerns. Before, I would have said with the previous administration, you're fine traveling with DACA, you're fine studying abroad with DACA. You're fine if your DACA permit expires and your new renewal permit hasn't come in. But that is completely different now. That I cannot say to my students anymore. And so they're definitely living in fear. Their parents are living in fear. And, I'm glad that we have this amazing group of clinicians and administrators supporting our undocumented students. Particularly what we're doing at UC San Diego. One, we're providing the legal services through UC Davis. So all of our students and their family members have access to free immigration legal services. Students at UCSD have access to one-on-ones with me where we can assess their situation and provide holistic support to them. We have a peer mentorship program, and we focus a lot on community building. We want them to feel safe on campus. We want them to feel that the campus is a campus for them and a campus that understands them. And, in general, this is something that's happening at all UC campuses. They're doing things a little bit different, but we all have the one-on-ones with our undocumented students. We all provide the legal services, and we all provide holistic support. With that said, I have a couple of things that I want to share with all of you, just simple 4 messages that I have. Be proactive when responding to student needs. What you see with one student is probably something that you will see with a lot more. Be 10 steps ahead of this new administration. Plan for programs and services that will live beyond changes in policies. Understand the student population you're working with and their special needs. Their needs, they need support beyond that of a general student. and work as one with your campus. Everyone needs to be in support of new campus policies and sometimes be willing to go into uncharted territories. It may be cliche, but we definitely need to be on the right side of history on this. With that said, I'd like to give the space back to Dr. Robin Holmes to start the question and answer session. Thank you.
And as we all can see by the clock, we are definitely over our time. So I think this is what we're going to do because I know that many of you have appointments that are either waiting or that you need to get to, but we really don't want to lose the important questions and information that you still might need or want. And so I'm going to encourage you all to send any questions that you might have to our administrative analyst, Elena Tejada, and her email is alina.tejara@ucop.edu. And just put in the subject line questions that you have from the undocumented webinar, and we will post those questions and the answers so that you can all participate and benefit from that. These have been great presentations. There's a lot of good information, a lot of really, really good resources. We heard about the steps that UC is taking in order to support our undocumented students. We hope that that'll be helpful to the other segments and folks who have been on this call, and that you will ask for more information and about more resources. We feel as though this conversation needs to continue. So we will make sure that after the webinar is over, that we have the website up and information on how you can link to the website, as well as we want to hear your questions and your thoughts and concerns, and we'll do our best to get back to all of you and to share that information across the various institutions. So again, I want to thank you all for participating in this webinar and for your patience as we learn about using this technology. We hope that we will have other opportunities to talk on this important topic in the near future, and we hope that you have a great week. So thank you again.